Hello and welcome into a first segment of No Face, No Case. It's a new series we're starting on the Fantasy Bums YouTube channel. My name is Shanholtz, and today we're starting off very easy with three superstar quarterbacks in the NFL. You'll definitely know these guys by the end for sure because there's really no hiding these guys with their stats and where like their profiles and stuff. But this is just to introduce the segment and to get us started. These are three quarterbacks that are going to go very high in everyone's redrafts, very high in dynasty. Like these are young, talented quarterbacks with very high potent offenses, and these guys are just going to fly off your board. So maybe looking at the stats, it might sway you one or the other. But with that being said, let's just jump right into it. So the first part of this is going to be the player's profile. This is just an overlay, like his height, age, weight, etc. This is what you look at on a scouting report. So starting with the first contestant in red, he is the oldest out of the three at age 26. He is 6'4", 215 pounds, so a rather bigger quarterback, which we like. Coming out of high school, he was a 4-star recruit. And I only put Power 5 conference yes or no because if we gave you the college, these guys are notorious with their college, so they would give it away. So I like a little bit of surprise. So yes, he was in the Power 5 conference, and he has one Pro Bowl selection. So he's got it done at high school, the collegiate, and the NFL and the professional level. All three of these guys are pretty much got it done, all three levels. Contestant 2 is going to be in blue for us. He's the middle child of these three. He is 25 years old, a little taller than QB1 at 6'6", and the heaviest one as well at 236. So this is going to be your biggest quarterback out of the three, if that's something you like. Coming out of high school, he was a 4-star recruit as well, and a Power 5 conference player, and a Pro Bowl selection. He also has one. Like I said, all three of these guys are relatively younger, so they're not going to have an established career yet, but they're well on their way, bearing any injuries or anything. And this is the youngest out of the three at age 23. He is also 6'6", 220, so all three of these quarterbacks have no height issues. They're all 6'4" or taller and over 200 pounds. So the height and weight check out for me for all three. Coming out of high school, however, this one separates himself a little bit from the first two, given that he has the second highest ever recorded 24/7 composite score. The only person to beat him ever is Vince Young with his perfect 1.0 rating. He scored a .9999, this player, so a very, very close second. Did he play for a Power 5? Yes, and he also has a Pro Bowl selection. So all three of these quarterbacks have one Pro Bowl selection, and this guy's got one at 23, so a little younger than the other two. So Dynasty, via these three stats so far, contestant 3 you could lean to a little bit, but all three of them are, like I said, very valuable options. So the next part of this is going to be the career fantasy finishes. This is just where they ended up as far as the ranking for each year they played. So this is going to be a pretty short segment, but just something to think of as far as, where they placed each year. So contestant 1 in red has played a total of 3 seasons. Like I said, they're very young, all three of them. His rookie year, he finished 25. Sophomore year finished QB7, and then last year finished QB4. So the jump from rookie to sophomore year is very prevalent here. He jumped almost 20 spaces. To me, if I'm looking at this just on a piece of paper, no name or nothing attached, it looks like to me that this QB is on pace to be around a QB 10 finish. His sophomore and third year, he's has eclipsed the top 10. And his rookie year seemed to be an outlier, which in retrospect it was based on what actually happened in real life. But you can't see that on the stats. Unfortunately, you just see where they finished. Going to contestant 2 in blue, he has been the most dominant in his career as far as fantasy finishes. 3 total seasons as well, and he has not finished outside QB11. His rookie year is QB9. His sophomore year is QB2, which is phenomenal. And then last year he finished QB11. Out of the fantasy finishes, this is definitely a QB you want to take if you are going based off the past. And then contestant 3 in yellow has the least amount of seasons with 2. Granted, he is only 23 years old, so take that into account. His rookie year, he finished QB 23, and then last year he finished QB 8. So going from his rookie to sophomore year, he's jumped approximately 15. So, that's a very good jump as well. Just looking on the paper, you don't know if this is a fluke sophomore season or if he's going to continue the trend. Once you see the face, you'll probably be like, oh, he'll continue the trend because he's recognized as one of the better quarterbacks in the league. But just going off the fantasy career that they've had, contestant 2 seems to win this part of the show. And then going into their actual stat line, contestant 1 has played a total of 42 games. And as far as rushing for all three of these are all pretty much going to be your pocket passer type quarterbacks. So these guys aren't relatively going to get it done on the ground for you as far as fantasy, but they definitely will get it done in the air, and it shows based on their previous fantasy performances. This contestant has thrown 36 attempts per game. Very good. That's a very high attempt rate. And he's completed 68% of those, which is a very good completion. That's almost 70%, which is extremely high. 7.7 yards per completion, which is very good. So when he completes the ball, he gets some yards behind it as well. 5.4% of all attempts have turned into touchdowns. So about 1 in every 20 passes is going to get you 6 points. And then 2% of his attempts into interceptions. So about 1 in every 50 passes will get you a pick. So I'll definitely take that ratio. It's almost a 3-to-1 ratio. And 13% of his completions ended 20 yards or more. So this guy definitely likes to throw the deep ball when he makes the completion. And then the rushing's nothing really spectacular. 4 attempts per game, 3.4 yards per carry, which is just basically QB sneaks or scrambles if he needs to get out of the pocket. 6.6% of his carries end up as touchdowns. Like I said, this is probably scrambles at the goal line or QB sneaks into the end zone. This is not going to get it done on the ground for you. And then as far as fumbles go, he's had 20 in his career total. This is like QB sacks. This is just running and losing the ball. And 9 of those have been recovered by the other team. So if your league does fumbles and fumbles lost, that's just something to take account, that he loses about 50%, 45% of his fumbles. And then going into contestant 2, he has played the most games, so 49. So contestant 2 seems to stay on the field a little more than contestant 1, but only 7 games, which I guess in 3 seasons, that's quite a few games. That's a little over 2 games per season. Something to think about if you're drafting. Almost 2,000 attempts in 3 seasons is nuts. 40 attempts per game is such a high attempts per game rate. And he completes those just about as good as contestant 1 at 67%. He has 14,089 yards, which is immaculate for 3 seasons in the NFL. 7.2 yards per completion. So a little lower than QB1, but with the attempts per game and everything, you'll take that 10 out of 10 days. So a little under 5% of his attempts turn into touchdowns, and a little under 2% of his attempts turn into picks. So we're rocking about 1 to 3 like we did the last one, approximately. And then cutting down to the 20-yard completions, he has 154 of them, which is more than QB1, but less percentage of his completions turn in. So he likes to throw the ball deep as well. Almost a 12%. Anything over 10 for me is he likes to throw the deep ball. I mean, that's pretty good. And then his rushing, like the last guy, nothing spectacular. 172 attempts for 683 yards, 8 touchdowns, so a little less than 5% of his rushes. So he's just a goal line rusher or a scrambler into the end zone for touchdowns. Nothing on the ground is going to get it done for you here. And then about 33.3%, give or take, is going to be his fumbles lost. 15 total, so less fumbles lost than the last guy. And more games, so, I mean, that's a pretty good rate. And then contestant 3 has 34 games in total. So he's played 2 full seasons. So very good. All 3 of these guys relatively stay on the field. His passing numbers are going to be a little lower, though. But they don't have the extra 3rd season where the other 2 quarterbacks seem to, they're both of the quarterbacks in the 3rd season broke the top 11. So if this guy's on pace for that, these stats are going to be better as well for the upcoming year. But just stats are stats. So diving into him, the least amount of attempts, the least amount of completions, the least amount of yards, definitely the lowest amount of touchdowns per attempt at 3%. That is not very good. I mean, you definitely want higher than that. That's 3 out of every 100 passes. Like that's terrible. We got to get that up. And then 2% of his attempts turn into picks. So almost a 1-to-1 ratio as far as touchdown per picks. That's not very good for one of the acclaimed elite passers in our league. And then 98 deep ball, so 13.1%. So this guy does get it done downfield for you. And then the rushing's the same as the other 2. He's not going to get it done for you on the ground. But the fumbles lost is very high. That's like 67%. So the most fumbles lost, and the least amount of passing. Granted, His rookie year, obviously finished QB 23, QB 8 last year. So you got to cut the kid some slack because he only has 2 seasons to go off of, where the other two have 3. But just looking at the stats for what they are, QB3 seems to be a little behind the first 2. And then this is just based off last year. If you don't want to listen to all the prior stats, like the rookies and stuff, if you want to cut out the outliers, this is what they did last season. So this is also a good metric to look at. So going into their last year stats, contestant 1 in red had 17 games, so a full season, finished QB4, so top 5 finish from this guy. And he dominated passing. And if you take the stats from last year rushing, he was a pretty good rusher as far as the quarterback position. So attempts was QB5, completions QB5, yards QB5. The touchdowns, he had 36 last year. So 36 of his touchdowns just came from last year, which is QB2. And he was tied 5th for interceptions. And if you do fantasy points per game, he finished 21.7. So I believe this is the only one out of the 3 with a 20 fantasy points per game or higher finish. That obviously put him at QB4. And then rushing, he finished QB7 in attempts and QB12 in yards. So breaking the top 15 in both those is a very good sign for a pocket passing quarterback. And he had 5 touchdowns last year. So he tied for QB5 in that department as well. So last year, this guy got it done both ways as far as the quarterback position goes. Tested 2 last year, played a full season, QB11. The stats don't tell the whole story here. Just going into, he played through a lot of stuff. That probably gave it away right there for you. But like I said, stats tell majority of the story, but not the whole thing. But for fantasy, it doesn't really matter. Stats are stats. So just looking, he also killed it as well, even with the injuries that he faced. So full season, played hurt most of the season, finished with 700 attempts. That's QB2 only behind Tom Brady, as well as the completions. Yards, he almost had 5,000 yards last year, and he was injured. That just shows you how dominant this guy is at the QB position. That put him as QB2 as well. He had 25 touchdowns, which is tied for QB8. For 700 attempts, that's rather low. Interceptions, he had 10, which put him in the top 15. And fantasy points per game, he ended with 17 fantasy points per game, which put him a little lower than where he finished at QB 17. Granted, there's a couple of outliers in that stat as well, so take that one with a grain of salt. There's like 2 or 3. I think Sam Howell was like QB 3 or something as far as fantasy points per game, because he played one game and he killed Dallas's secondary defense last week. So that one's a little more of an outlier stat, but it's just nice to see, the stats on paper. And then rushing attempts, he didn't really do much on the ground last year. QB 14 in attempts, 17 in yards, and didn't even score a touchdown, so tied last, obviously. So not as good on the ground. This guy, you're going to rely on the passing for sure. Whereas the other quarterback, it seems like he broke top 15 in everything. So the other quarterback might get you a little bit of rushing as well, but you're not going to get it from this guy. And then contestant 3 here, he played a full game or full season as well, finished QB8. And his stats are actually pretty good. QB7 in attempts and completions, QB9 with over 4,000 yards, tied contestant 2 with 25 touchdowns, which pushed him at QB8. And he tied QB20 in interceptions with 8, so very low on the list for interceptions, which is good, is what you want. And finished 17.9 fantasy points per game, which would put him at QB12. Again, there are outliers in that stat, so don't take that one with wholeheartedly. And rushing this, he did very good at rushing, it looks like. 62 attempts for 291 yards, throws him at QB8 for both those stats, and tied QB5 with touchdowns with 5. So this guy does get it done on the ground, it looks like, just based off the stats himself. Finished within QB10 in all 3 of those categories. So this guy can get you some points on the ground. And he obviously can get it done in the air, with all these being within QB, the ones that you want within QB9. Interceptions you want lower, so QB20 is actually very good for that. He only threw 8 interceptions. So that's about a 3-to-1 ratio. So that's exactly where you want to be. The other guy's career stats were around there. So this guy's last season was around there. So this guy's definitely on trend to keep being within the top, let's say, 10 quarterbacks in the league as far as fantasy and just NFL. This guy's a very good quarterback in the NFL as well. Obviously, with his stats and stuff, been in the Pro Bowl. All three of these quarterbacks been in the Pro Bowl. All three of these quarterbacks played Power 5. And all three of these quarterbacks were very good coming out of high school. So you can't go wrong with any of these quarterbacks. But I showed you the stats. I showed you the profile. And these players are, the red was Joe Burrow, the blue was Justin Herbert, and the yellow was Trevor Lawrence. Now, I know that these guys were probably, you probably guessed who these players were during the show. But going into this segment in the future, we're definitely going to have some more, out of place characters for you. Some stats that really jump out of the page. Just something I took away from this personally. I love the NFL, and obviously I like fantasy because we have a podcast and stuff about it. But Justin Herbert's stats just blew me away. I didn't realize how dominant he was of a quarterback. So that's something to think about going into drafts. When you dive into the actual stats of stuff, he does better than Burrow in the passing game. And Burrow's going at a premium in drafts this year. So Justin Herbert's a very good look. He was injured last year. People are just going to think he was QB 11. That's all they see. But like I showed you the stats, the year before that, he finished QB 2 when he's healthy and in the pocket. He had that rib injury all last season. And Trevor Lawrence is very good as well. Like I said, all three of these are names that you probably heard of and are probably targeting at least in your drafts. So you can't go wrong. But in my opinion, with the stats and everything, you almost have to go Herbert where you're going to get him as an ADP. The ADP per performance is going to be Justin Herbert for me, followed by probably Joe Burrow and then Trevor Lawrence. But you guys can just, it's your guys' team. You decide who you like. That's just my personal opinion. And that does it for the first ever episode of No Face, No Case, where we don't judge the players by the names, but by the stats. My name's Shanholtz, and if you enjoy the content that you watched today, please watch one of the other videos that help us out a lot, getting the views up and stuff. And our socials are below. If you want to follow us on them as well, that would help us out greatly. And we also have a podcast that's available on most streaming services. So just type in Fantasy Bums Podcast, and I'm sure you'll find it there. Or we have a link tree in all the socials below. Just click that, and it'll take you to everything. As far as our affiliate sponsors, we have W Energy Drink, and as well as Reaper Apparel. So that's two things you can get a discount on. Helps us help you. And that's about it for me. So my name's Shanholtz, and hopefully you enjoyed this segment, and hopefully there's more to come in the future.